Hello and welcome to another Zap Chat video. Once again, I am joined by Yanis.
Hello.
So this week we are going to be covering automation. What I want to do is give an introduction to Zap automation, kind of explain what all the options are and why you might want to use them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen straight away because what I'll do is switch over to my browser and show you the Zap website. And if you go to documentation, then go to automate, then you will see, make that a little bit, can I zoom in on that? I can't remember the keys, yeah. So there you'll see the list of automation options. Now, that's not all there is to it, otherwise we'd kind of have to stop here. So what I want to do is kind of go through these options and explain what they're useful for, actually demo most of them as well. But one thing, we've got a lot of options, and one of the reasons is because we've got Zap has a lot of functionality. And when you're automating Zap, we found out that some people want some very simple options and some people want some very complicated things. And therefore, what we're looking at is trying to have a balance between ease of use and flexibility and functionality. So for the demo, I'm actually going to run, I'm running the weekly, so it's the latest weekly. And let me find so I will just start up the Zap GUI just to try and make a little bit of a point. And what I want to do is one of the options here is to show all of the tabs. And you can now see there's lots of tabs. Yeah. So if you think each one of those tabs is equivalent to a tool within Zap. So Zap it's almost like an IDE, or you could say it's an integrated hacking environment. So it is very complex, and it's complex because it has to do hard things. Finding security vulnerabilities in web applications is hard, and to do it well, you really need a manual pen tester, like Yanis, for example. But so we have lots of options for manual pen testers, but what we try and do is we try and make as many of these options automatable as possible. And if I'll just go and have a look at the options screen here and go through, you'll see there are lots and lots of options.
Many configuration parameters, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
As expected, right?
Yeah. So this means Zap is really tunable, but it also means that if you're running Zap from the command line, there's a huge amount of things you could configure. So it's how do we actually make that usable while still being helpful. So the very first one we took on that list, can switch back, is Zapit. So Yanis, you know about Zapit, don't you? Do you want to give a quick summary?
One or two things. The whole idea is that we issue one request, get one response back. Now it might be a 302, a redirect, etc. But the page that we get back, we analyze to the fullest possible extent, and you get a feel of what application you're up against by looking at a single view, a single page. The question is, have you zapped your website? That's where Zapit comes from. And we can see now, Simon, that it's a command line option, correct?
It is, yeah. We don't actually have a GUI option for it. So I'm going to run it from the command line. And actually what I'll do is I'm going to show you this really exciting test page that I've created. And it says it's a very simple page. It does absolutely nothing.
HTML. I haven't seen that in years.
Yeah, so the reason I've done this is because I want to demo all of these options. And if we had a proper website there, it would take too long. Full scans of using Zap take a while because there's a lot of functionality to test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Zap from the command line. I'm using the -dir option because then that keeps Zap's configuration separate, and it keeps separate from my dev environment where I'm doing all sorts of horrible things. I'm starting Zap on a different port because I've got Tomcat on 8080 and I don't want to clash with that. Minus command because I'm doing this on the command line, minus Zapit, and the target URL. And we'll see very quickly that it's made one request and it got a 200, haven't actually got the Wappalizer add-on installed, so it can't tell you what technology involved. 5 alerts. It's found on the root page. It's found 8 HTML tags, no fields. So this is, and if you're interested in this Zapit scan, then we actually recorded another video on it. So you go and watch that for more details. The idea, as Yanis said, it's a very quick, tell me about this stuff. So great, but it's not really good for finding, you're not going to find cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, all of these things, SQL injection. That's not what Zapit is for. So
Correct.
yeah, this is simple and effective, but of limited use or limited functionality. Now, the next one is the quick start command line, and that is actually a little bit similar, but it does a bit more. Now,
Slightly more exciting.
So if I just do, actually, let me go back to get those options still and just do -H, then that should give me all of the command line options. Now, we don't actually list these everywhere, anywhere on the website, because we have a set of command line options that are available in the core, and then every single add-on can add their own command line options if they need to. So the options you've got available will depend on which add-ons you've got installed. Now, if I scroll down somewhere, you will see we've actually got this quick URL, quick out, and quick progress. So what I'm going to do is see if I can make sure I can see what I'm doing now. So I'm actually going to change this to quick URL. And run it again.
Now, a few things here are going to be slightly different, right? Even though we're scanning a single page, we've actually triggered the spider. This is not the Ajax spider. This is the, if you like, good old basic spider. What we used to
Exactly.
have spidering beforehand.
Yeah, it's traditional spider. And what you'll see is we've actually dumped out an XML report on the command line.
Right.
How helpful is this? I don't know. But you'll see we actually have this quick out file name. So you can actually choose to put the report to a file, which is probably more useful. And you can actually choose whether you have the standard HTML, JSON, Markdown, or XML results based on the file extension. We've also got a quick progress option, and this just kind of shows you how far it's getting along. So this is useful. It's, gives you more information than Zapit, but depending on the website, could take a lot longer. But as Yanis said, he uses traditional spider. There's no option for the Ajax spider and no other options really. That's about it. So it is very quick, or quick to use, not necessarily quick to run, and has limited functionality.
Mm-hmm.
So what's next? We have these Docker package scans, and we have GitHub Actions, which I'll kind of treat them as the same because the GitHub Actions are just wrappers around the Docker package scans.
Mm-hmm.
And the Docker package scans actually provide quite a bit more functionality. So we have this Docker user guide, and we have 3 different types of scan. We have the baseline scan, the full scan, and the API scan. So let me just go and kick these off. What I'll do is...
Things are getting more interesting here. Now we have the option to specify what type of scan we're going to get back, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to run the baseline scan, and so I'm running Docker, and I'm going to use the ZAP weekly. And can you guess what's going to happen here? It's a trick question, by the way. So first of all, you'll see we're actually using the automation framework.
Correct.
And
but I don't think that's the answer you were looking for.
No, I'm just waiting to see whether because I'm expecting this to fail. Can you tell me why it's going to fail?
You're passing a URL. The port is right.
The problem is the local host, because the package scans run in Docker, and I'm running my Tomcat on locally, and so Docker cannot actually access localhost.
Yes.
So this is actually a Docker problem or feature, if you like, it is not something that is under our control. So what we need to do is we need to find out what URL is accessible to Docker. And there's various, all will depend on your operating system, but on the Mac, I can actually find out my local URL there, and I can then actually use that and place this in. Note that if your target app is actually in another Docker container on the same machine, again, you'll have similar problems, but there are different ways around that. We've got more details on the website. And I'll just mention again, so the fact we're using the automation framework, we are actually porting, or we're migrating the package scans to use the automation framework, because it actually provides more flexibility and means it's easier for us to maintain. So one thing you'll notice is we've actually found a total of 33 URLs, which is surprising because it is just one page on the app. And you can actually see all of the passive scan rules that ZAP has run and that are passed. So what happens with the package scans is they will by default use all of the scan rules you have available. So if you've just got the release quality ones, then those will just be those. But if you've got beta status and alpha status, they will be used as well by default.
So that's an important point. And Simon, just real quickly, where have we specified in the command line options that this is a baseline scan? If you don't mind just showing us that.
It was actually there. So zapbaseline.py. So it's a Python file. It's a Python script.
Very important, right? So all the baseline scans as part of the automation, sorry, all the scans as part of the automation framework are specified in a Python format, and you can see them in the command line prep.
Package scans. So these are the package scans, which happens to use the automation framework.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what you'll see is we then have these warnings, and we're actually warning on /docs. So that's why we're actually running the spider from the root of the directory rather from the URL we actually specified, and that's for historical reasons and a few different cases we found where it causes a lot of problems not doing that. So we found a whole load of things, and you'll see down here, we've got different things like fail new, fail in progress, warn new, warn in prog, ignore, and pass. So there's actually quite a lot more things going on here. So I switch back and we'll have a look at the Docker user guide. That kind of explains various, that's kind of an overview. But if we go into the baseline scan, we'll see that there's actually we have a lot of options here, and you can actually see all of those. So if I just put baseline -h, then that should give us the same list. So one thing you can do is you can specify a configuration file, and this actually allows you to change which of the rules apply or which of them fail or warn or ignore. So we scroll down here, we'll see an example configuration file. And what you can do, there's an option to generate a configuration file from the command line as well. And by default, everything is warn. And you can then edit this file. It's just a text file, tab separated, and you can change that to fail or ignore. And then that will change how the package scan works.
Right.
And then you'll see we've got options for reporting. Again, similar to the quick start option, it's the standard HTML, Markdown, XML, or JSON reports. So we can't specify any format you like. There's a limit there. We've got an option to include passive scan rules, and there's an option to include the Ajax spider as well, and various other things. So you've got delays, and there's quite a few extra options. And if you can actually specify a context file, and if you do that, then you can also specify a user, but you have to configure this context file separately, probably via ZAP.
So it's very important to tie this into the earlier, if you like, basic functionality, let's say, of Zapit, right? Ideally, you want to be checking during Zapit what the milliseconds are of the request response if you're going to be specifying any timeouts in the advanced scan. And generally, you want to be ready to go from a baseline perspective before you get into the even more advanced stuff that Simon's about to show us.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've got is we actually have limits on how long to spider, for example, because the baseline is actually so when I was working at Mozilla, we configured the baseline scan to run on every pull request on some of our repos. So this will actually finish within a couple of minutes. So it's something that you can use within CI/CD. So one of the options we have is, so we've got the API scan, and that I'm not going to demo because my example app doesn't have an API definition, but this supports OpenAPI, SOAP, and GraphQL. And we'll probably have Postman support coming very soon, hopefully. But the other one then is the full scan. So what I'll do is go back to here and then run the full scan. And this shouldn't take much longer because it's only that single page. We will not be, even though we'll be spidering from the root, we will not be attacking everything. So we'll only be attacking the example page that I've generated. But if I switch back, then you'll see the full scan has very similar options. And in fact, the configuration file can also include the active scan rules as well as the passive scan rules. So, and again, the -A option will include the alpha, active, and passive scan rules. The package scans actually always include the beta scan rules, again, for historical purposes.
Very important, yeah.
And
so we're expecting a lot more verbosity and a lot more output with this type of scan, right, Simon?
Normally, yes, but in this particular case, we're not expecting it because there's not much functionality there. But we're actually attacking the application. And this is one reason why I didn't want to use example.com, because I don't have permission to attack example.com. Something like the baseline scan is absolutely fine, but the full scan is not acceptable. You shouldn't be doing that if you don't have permission.
Yeah, and something on time, real quickly. I remember when I was training our red team, and they would have a real big problem in scaling in terms of time, how they attacked an application. And that would be because, just imagine that you have X number of fields available, right? And you need to check them all for SQL injection. Well, that's one check, right? But if you have multiple checks, cross-site scripting and so on, then that time grows exponentially. And that exponential growth means that, of course, you're going to be twiddling your thumbs expecting for the scan to complete. But now it's an advanced scan, it's not a baseline scan. And that means that the time that you need to cater for that needs to be sufficient, right? So word of warning there, going from changing baseline scan to something much more advanced also implies that you're going to have an exponential growth in the time of scanning, let alone the spidering that will come before it, right?
Exactly. And you'll see here we've got a lot more passes. So we've got we've actually 131, so we're running a lot more rules here, and we're running the active scan rules as well as the passive ones. So it's doing a lot more, and if you're running against a real application, this will take significantly longer. But this is where you will actually find the interesting things like cross-site scripting and SQL injection. I said this is where we're actually attacking, so you do need to have permission to attack the application you're targeting. So I'm not going to. So the the GitHub actions are essentially the same as the Docker package scans. They are using the Docker package scans, but you also have the option to raise issues on the relevant repos as well. So they add a little bit more functionality there. So what I want to do now is actually create an automation framework plan. So there are various ways of doing that, but the easiest one is actually by running ZAP. And so I'm going to start up ZAP.
And while that loads up, what exactly is a plan, Simon?
So an automation plan is a set of jobs. So
Right.
ZAP has a lot of functionality, and we've kind of distilled those into a set of jobs that we think will be most useful in automation. And what you need to do is go to the automation tab, which is hidden by default. And what you can do is then, if that, we have various buttons down here, and we have an option to create a new plan. Now you have to specify context. So this works quite well if you've actually done some manual testing first, which I haven't done. And you'll see what effect that has. And we've got profiles here, and you can see this is the list of jobs. So this is all of the jobs available to me based on what I've got installed. And if you actually go to the documentation, you will see a list of all the jobs that are available. So there may well be some jobs that aren't available to me because I don't have those relevant add-ons installed. But online, you will have the full list. Now, you can choose a custom profile, in which case you can choose whichever jobs you want, but I want to do a full scan. So I will save that, and you'll see we now have this list of jobs down here, and they've got a status. Now, just for kicks, I will run that, and you'll see immediately I get an error. And if you switch to the output tab, you'll see no URLs defined in any of the context. I haven't told the plan what to do.
Where to point it to, yeah.
Yep. So what I can do is we can double click on any of these things, and we can then actually modify stuff. So what I want is I want my URL, and you can put any number of URLs in here, and it will include everything else. And you can, you can actually have include, exclude, and technology configurations. You can't actually configure the authentication for the context here, even though this is actually something that the automation framework supports, just the GUI hasn't been updated yet. Another thing I will do is I will change the report because I think I'll go for traditional PDF, and I will display the report when it runs. Oh, the other thing is I will take the Ajax spider out because this one, we know it won't actually help at all and just speed things up. So we can actually, even though once we create a plan, we can add more jobs, we can remove them, we can move them up and down. So you can actually choose, say you want both the spider and the Ajax spider, you can choose which order they run in, which you can't do from the package scans. So this is, that is creating my plan. And if I run that, we can then see the progress down here. We can see that the spider has run, the passive scan has run, and there we go. There's the report.
Your report.
That ran very quickly, and it will not have actually spidered the whole of my Tomcat documents because you've got a lot more flexibility. So you can actually say where it's going to, where you're going to include. So you can actually choose URLs as well. So each of these jobs has its own set of options. So you can choose whether it's a context, an authenticated user available. You could actually choose to crawl just a particular part of your site rather than the whole site. So there's lots of options here. So that is how we run it in the desktop. And that's all well and good, but we want to do these things from the command line. So what I'll do is I will save, and
now we're going to have a lovely YAML file ready to go.
Yep. So I'll call it demo.yaml, and I will close that down.
While you close that down, I think it's important to, again, as a general good practice, right, to try things out and set them up in the GUI as much as possible. Test them out if you like. Always test them out also in a smaller scale, especially if you've got some grandiose website, and then move into the command line where you have that ability to just prioritize automation and industrialize your actions, if you like.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's very important. And what you can see, and you can then see what's going on much more easily. We have so many people come into the ZAP user group saying something's gone wrong in automation and trying to diagnose it. I always say, can you use the ZAP desktop first? Because it's so much easier to see what's going on. So here we have our YAML file. So what we can do now is we can, I'll end up just going far too far back just to actually, so I want to do auto run, and I will put in the full directory just to make sure it picks up the right one. Hopefully that's right. And so, yeah, we've got minus command minus auto run, and we're just passing in the YAML file. So we will then, and you can hear, so this is all the output you saw in the output tab. You can see the different jobs running, and there's a report generated. So that ran exactly the same as it ran within the GUI.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing I'll actually note here is there are some tests here. So you can see that we actually, one of these tests failed. Now, by default, the test gets added at info level, which is why the whole thing didn't fail. But the automation framework has a lot more flexibility on which jobs to run, what parameters to pass in, and what to check for. So you can actually check for a whole load of extra things to make sure that the scan is doing what you think it's doing. And this is something I will cover at a later date in a different Zapit video, I think. So that is the automation framework. And last but not least is the ZAP API in daemon mode. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I want to start ZAP in daemon mode. So I'm going to start a new tab and paste in the magic command. So this one, again, I'm starting with the directory and I'm putting it in daemon mode, but I'm also disabling the API key. And this is important because when ZAP starts, it will generate a random API key. And you can't tell what it is if you start ZAP from the command line. You can actually specify an API key. So if you need to use one, that's what you do. But in this environment, it's a safe environment. So I'm just going to disable it. But if you're actually testing websites that are potentially malicious, you should definitely not disable the API key, because there are ways in which we know that websites will try and attack tools like ZAP. So ZAP is now listening on localhost 1990. Now, one thing I'll do is I will just go. I'll actually point my browser at 1990.
How nice is this? You get a pack file you can download, some local links, you can install a CA, right?
Yeah, all these things. And one thing I've got is a link to the local API. And so this is, you will see we have components. So these kind of often match tabs or add-ons. And each of these will actually have a whole load of what we call views, which is where you can see things, actions where you can change things. And there are sometimes other things as well. So we'll have a look at core, a load of views, a load of actions, and at the end, a load of other things, and other things don't return structured data. They return something else. We actually have shortcuts as well. So the API is very, very thorough. So the API essentially allows you to control ZAP as if you were at the desktop. And if you remember how many options there were in different tabs, there's a huge amount of things to do. And the API is one of the things we added quite early on in ZAP development. And we found that it was actually too complicated for most people. So that's one reason why I introduced the package scans and then the automation framework. So the API is incredibly powerful, but it's also not great for people who are new to ZAP, and it's not great for a lot of people who want to do standard automation things. So how do you use the API? Well, you can actually control the API from this GUI if you want, which is useful for testing, but it's not so good if you actually really want to automate ZAP. So we have various API clients, including one written in Python. And this is kind of the main one. There's a Python, Java, there's JavaScript, there's a whole range of them, but the Python one, the one I tend to use most of all. And you'll see we actually have some examples, and we have a basic spider scan example. And this is actually what I've copied. So let's just, so you do actually have to install the ZAP Python library, and then you'll see we've got, we have the URL, the target URL, we have the how to actually start ZAP, but that only works if it's listening on 8080. So if you're listening on a different port, you've got a different way of doing it. Then we access the target, we spider the target, and we active scan. And you'll see we actually have to, we kick off the spider, and then we have to loop waiting until it finishes. So things like the spider and the active scan are asynchronous operations as far as the API is concerned. Something like an active scan could take hours potentially. So that's why you kick it off, and then you need to poll to see how far it goes. So with the API, you can actually kick off multiple spiders, multiple active scans at the same time concurrently. We don't support that in the automation framework. And in most cases, I think most people don't need it. If you're actually doing large scale scanning, I'd recommend kicking off a new ZAP instance for each scan you want to do. But if you want to do that, then this is an option for you, and the API is really the only way to go.
And you should really know what your spidering time is if you're doing any sort of CI/CD ahead of time, or
Yeah,
have at least some sort of SLA defined in terms of why is the spidering taking so long. That's an indicator that something else is going on that is probably not part of Zapit and the configuration, but it's something involving the website, the application, the deployment, etc. So it's good to have some sort of indication of what spidering times you're looking at ahead of doing any sort of automation.
definitely. Yeah. If you don't know what you're expecting, then you don't know whether it's working the way you expect it.
We'll never catch on, Simon.
Yeah, no, it won't. So this is, I've just copied that file, and you can see I've got a different target, and I've actually I'm using this option to initialize the client because I'm listening on 1990. So remember, I've got ZAP in daemon mode running on another tab, and then all I need to do is run this with Python 3. And again, so we can see we're accessing it, we're spidering it with active scanning, and actually gives you some progress here as well. And
Can I
then
just say, how nice is this, right? That you're able to, for those out there that don't, I've written a ton of Java for open source projects, but for those that, don't like Java, right? You can just do it in Python through the daemon mode, have it listen, and then you just get your results back using the language that, is your preference.
exactly. And in this case, you'll see we're just dumping the results out in JSON format on the command line. Obviously, you've got complete choice here. So this really allows you to do whatever you want to do. It gives, the API is the most amount of flexibility possible. And I think that's the kind of one of the lessons, one of the things that should come out of this is we have a lot of options, and there's the reason we have so many options is because it's a balance between usability and functionality and flexibility. And what I'm planning on doing.
I was just going to say, speaking about options, do you want to quickly hear a story from the trenches on the harshest CI/CD Zapit rule that I've ever heard of?
Absolutely.
All right, so we're trying to figure out what's holding back the build, and we're seeing that it's a security rule that has been triggered, but it's not one that's been set by any of the security teams, right? So we're wondering, on the one side, what is this rule? And on the second side, we're really proud of the fact that we're not writing security rules only within the security team, but also developers and other members of staff have taken that on board. And it turns out that the entire pipeline has failed because somebody has written the harshest rule in terms of a user agent check. for a specific browser version or set of browsers, actually, and didn't allow or cater for any future versions I think it was Safari in that case, where the iOS version number gets passed as part of the update of the actual iOS, when Apple releases an update. And we had to have a quiet conversation saying, it's great that you're writing your own rules, but when it comes to rules that fail the whole pipeline, probably a user agent rule, slightly harsh, given that there are no active exploits in history for modern browsers, just based on the version check.
Yes, very nice. So one thing we're planning on doing is actually writing some more documentation, because we do have this kind of different ways of automating ZAP, but we don't give you a great deal more help. So we're going to try and write some more docs, and it kind of ties in. We have this getting started guide, and we want to improve this. So, well, actually, we don't want to change this at all, but we want to have some getting further guides. And the first getting further guide will be on automation, and we'll start publishing things soon. If you're watching this several weeks or months after we recorded it, it will hopefully be there. So just go to the documentation, and there may well be then a getting further link underneath here. But that is, I think, everything I wanted to cover. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Yanis, about ZAP automation? Great. So, yep, that was all about an introduction to ZAP automation. We will be covering the automation framework in another one of these episodes. But if you have any feedback, or you'd like any other us to cover any other topics, then please let us know in the comments below. Thank you very much.